probably one of the hardest things to do on a dairy is to get a cow pregnant in a timely way.
Well, welcome everybody to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm your host for today, Gail Carpenter. I'm the State Dairy Extension Specialist at Iowa State University. And I'm joined today by Dr. Davy Brown. Currently, Davy works for, he's a dairy nutritionist and owner of Integer Nutrition. Sorry, I kind of stumbled on that a little bit. And prior to that, he's had a pretty rich history. He finished his PhD at the University of Wyoming in 1996. Since then, he's worked with ConAgra, Pioneer, Agfinity. I got that right? Those three companies. So working as a dairy nutritionist and researcher, and started his own company in March 2018. So Davy, what did I leave out? It sounds like you had a pretty storied career to date.
Well, no, I think you pretty well nailed it. Thanks for having me, by the way. I appreciate being here and getting an opportunity to comment. Probably the couple neat things, I guess you don't get to do very often. We were able to do a couple of patent projects. And so in the area of steam flaking, that we achieved a patent on a method for steam flaking grain, and we achieved a method for measuring the degree of grain processing and gelatinization. So those were good projects there. And they were kind of required for some other work we were doing with high oil corn and trying to determine the CLA content and the change of fatty acid composition of tissues, which in the late 90s, nobody really cared about. So now the omega story is getting out there. But anyway, so that probably covers that.
Your cattle are constantly threatened by the exposure of mycotoxins in feed. Now you can know if mycotoxins are present in your feed and what you should do about it. DSM Firmenich offers a range of analytical services to assess the mycotoxin contamination and solutions to combat mycotoxins. Don't let mycotoxins contaminate your performance. Learn more at dsm.com/ANH-NA.
So what made you want to take off and kind of do your own thing?
Well, so I think that's kind of a normal pathway for a nutritionist. You tend to start working with a company. And for me, I didn't really work on the feed company side so much. Worked for, directly for the end users in early my career, and it just kind of stayed that way. The pathway ultimately led into, I think pretty naturally, becoming an independent dairy nutritionist. And so I did that for several years, 7 years with Agfinity in that role. Went on and joined an independent consulting group for the next 15, and then overlapped there with opening my own store, if you will, Integer Nutrition. And so we've been running out of Integer Nutrition since 2018 and to present. And so there we work in Colorado, Texas, Kansas, do a little international work there as well. And we independent dairy nutritionists for 25 years. And so we just direct consult for our dairy clients.
All right. I'm always curious, this is a little off topic, but I'm always curious where people get their company names from. So what inspired the name Integer Nutrition?
That's a great question. So I kind of have a thing for Greek letters and Latin terminology and things like that. And so my daughter and I were kicking around the idea one day, and I like the symbols and things like this. And so I'm like, I'm kind of looking for a pretty cool name that's comprehensive. And so the term integer, of course, it means a whole number. But then if you look up some of the Latin history on it, it's a pretty complete definition of just trying to get things right. And so we thought we thought the symbol was cool as well. So that's how we came up with that. And it kind of goes just deep into the deeper definitions of it. So yeah, great question.
Very cool.
Some people know it as a mathematical term. Others are like, what is that? So
okay. Yeah.
Some people just like it because it's kind of stylish. So
yeah, I'm always, when I see a unique name, I'm always curious what the backstory was. And sometimes it was just like we thought it sounded cool. And sometimes it actually has a pretty solid background. Yeah.
Yeah. Great question.
So speaking of getting things right, the topic that you said you were interested in talking about today is the interrelationship between nutrition and reproduction. So walk us through that. Where does that relationship start? How do we dial it in, and how do we know that we have that right?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. That's a good question, because I think in every commercial herd or dairy that we work with, probably one of the hardest things to do on a dairy is to get a cow pregnant in a timely way. And oftentimes the reproductive success of a herd is viewed as it's on its own island or in its own silo and somewhat separate from the nutritional piece, or at least there's not much intimate discussions about it. You kind of have these different silos that one's operating independently of the other. And so the nutrition work kind of seems to be tied mostly to milk in the tank, animal performance. But ultimately, I mean, it's the same animal. And ultimately, the balance of the diet and the nutrients that are flowing and some understanding of immunology and antioxidant and status of the animal, oxidative stress, things that dovetail into that space of reproduction are very much influenced by nutrition. And so it's just been an area for me that I've just become more and more involved in trying to look and understand better at what are some of the interrelationships between what I'm doing as a nutritionist on a dairy and how is that or is that not affecting reproductive success. Not trying to get into the space of breeding cows or anything like that, but I think everybody's heard the same thing. Well, if conception rate's off, it's either shoot the breeders or let's go shoot the nutritionist. And oftentimes it's more complex than that. It's not that somebody has something wrong. It's just there's some interrelationships that need to be understood. And so we just try to dissect that back a little bit further and get into the nuts and bolts or the weeds of what's going on with the embryo, what's going on with the cow. Certainly, the quickest step is just rule out that we have some sort of technician error or something like that. And those things can be done and trusted. And that's the key. Just one needs to trust the people that are working and doing the job. And it sure helps get on to the next levels here because there's just more and more data, I think, coming out and research that's showing early embryonic loss can be a function of all kinds of things. Oftentimes it's seasonal and related to heat stress, which tends to dove into immune-related issues and oxidative stress on the animal. Sometimes it's more of an overt or more of an actual immune challenge to the animal, like mycotoxin challenges, for example. We run into those things quite a bit. And whether they're acute challenges or whether they're more chronic challenges, they can have negative impacts on embryo survivability or even egg quality. And these are things that have nothing to do with the breeder, frankly, and oftentimes nothing to do with the nutrition. It is what it is. Things happen. And understanding, how to parse that out and come to the right decision pathway so that we can decide, hey, you know what? I think we have a toxin challenge and we need to go deal with that in some different way so that the breeders who are finding what they need to find to breed cows have more success in terms of, the embryonic survivability will be enhanced because we've taken out some sort of toxin challenge. And these inflammatory responses by cows, I mean, they come in many forms and ways, and toxins are one of them, but a lot of them are quite natural. A lot of them are just inflammatory responses due to having a calf. And the goal in life, of course, for a dairy cow is to have a calf launch into milk production, but then get pregnant very, very soon, relatively speaking, into lactation. And it's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of free radicals running around the body, and all this has to be taken care of. And a lot of time it's detrimental on an embryo. Single factor issues, not so much. But then when you start stacking heat stress or start stacking other seasonal effects, or you start stacking mycotoxin challenge, that's when these things start showing up, I think. And then the conversation needs to, deepen a little bit in terms of, hey, what's going on here? I think the biggest issue, at least that we come across these days, is in this space of embryo challenge, getting the diet right. I mean, obviously that's our primary job, and that's where we're going to look first. And we're not necessarily go down the road of toxins first, but just making sure you have a decently balanced diet. I mean, there's data that's showing starch levels, for example, acidotic propensities in cows, different things. They're going to just cause more inflammation, more chronic stress in the cow, and that can reduce, embryo survivability, embryonic success. We tend to make sure that those pieces are in place. Toxins aren't an issue. We recognize cows are going to be challenged. Once those boxes are checked, we kind of like to move into what products, if you will, or what technologies or methods are out there that, aren't trying to reverse a problem, but enhance what the cow's already doing, more of natural antioxidants or things like that are in our quiver. But also we're feeding these cows diets that may or may not be totally adequate, and some things that aren't going to land into the requirement space. One of the things we've taken a hard look at is beta carotene. I mean, that one there, a lot of data showing that it is enriching in follicular fluid, it's enriching in the embryo, it's improving embryo survivability, it's probably functioning as an antioxidant. I know vitamin A levels are increased in cows that are fed this thing. And so that seems to be something that's kind of a little bit of an eye-opener for me. I'm thinking, well, that's pretty cool, because these cows, I mean, they have wide ranges of beta carotene status going into lactation. But we all expect the same outcomes across all these cows that probably have a different baseline status. So it's been interesting. We've done a few samples, quite a few, I suppose, here now, but just looking at, pre-calving status, post-calving status, looking at outcomes, we feel like we're getting more embryo survivability, reducing days open, which has huge value. The jury's still out on some. The mechanisms seem pretty well in place, so we're going to ride this out for a while. We've got some herds that generally we try to deploy these interventions during heat stress times here, like summertime. Guys seem a little bit more receptive to try to do things. So it's like, hey, let's give this a shot. Most herds we work with, we've been on for years and years and years, have a lot of data. So we're able to do some pretty good year-over-year comparisons. I'm not so interested in comparing summer to winter as much as, well, if I can get 5 or 6 or 7 Julys under my belt, I'm pretty satisfied. If we're beating those historical numbers, then we're doing something meaningful. And so that's where a lot of this starts for us, is just getting these ideas deployed in the summertime. And some of the time it's like, wow, we did it. We've really got more animals pregnant. They got pregnant at a greater rate, which rates are good. I get that, but I'm interested in magnitude. So I want total numbers. And so we get that accomplished. And oftentimes guys will just say, hey, let's leave this in. If it works in summer, it works in winter. And, that's some technologies we try in the summer. They're very exclusive to just trying to combat, blood flows and stuff like this for summer, and enhanced placental blood flow. Embryo size correlates to these things. And so some of that stuff is in summer and comes out, in the late fall or whatever. But we try to look at things, not just, draw a flat line and pretend that cows do the same thing all year, every month. That's just not how it works. And at least in the dairies we work on. So, we tend to try to, at least look at things in a quarterly way, not disrupt the flow of commodities and stuff too bad, but look at things in a way that's a little more dynamic, a little more, tuned in with seasonal trends or temporal trends and how things work on a rural dairy. Yeah, great question. Great topic.
Yeah, great response too.
Oh, well, thank you.
So I get this question occasionally. I bet you do too. But I'm flushing a cow, right? Or I'm flushing. I've got a flush coming up for whatever, some of our higher value genetic animals. Some folks do a lot of that. Some not so much. But so a lot of times it's the show people who maybe don't have the tens of thousands of cows that we see on dairies out west. But what's a good response for that? Because I know that a lot of times that kind of gets, especially in the show world, it can get a little bit not always evidence-based, right? Mm-hmm. But it's based on, my experience, and this is kind of what works for me. And so what's a good place to start when you're talking about, hey, I've got some high value animals that I want to flush? What's a good place to start with recommendations for that?
Well, I defer that to the veterinarian, the embryo transfer guys, I think. I mean, it's a great question. It's just probably out of our scope. We don't get asked a whole lot nutritionally to get involved in that process. I mean, we do a lot more maybe dealing with genomics and stuff like that, but we work with a large commercial herd, so we're not really dealing a lot with flushing cows and this sort of stuff. That's fairly niche and fairly small, but it's important, and I think those guys should probably just focus on embryo quality, follicular size, and there's definitely nutritional interventions that enhance those things. There's a lot of data out there that'll show, hey, you're going to flush more eggs and have more likely improved embryo qualities from those enhancements. But to get into specific recommendations, I think those guys they're pretty good at what they do. I think they're going to be tuned in more than I would for sure on flushing cows and trying to enhance deploying genetics that way.
So usually when I start talking in class, or with producers about how nutrition and reproduction, and you got at this a little bit in your earlier response, but a lot of times when we're starting to get into those nutrition and repro interactions, the first thing I look at is that transition period, and whether we have that transition period kind of dialed in and our cows are transitioning well. Do you agree with that, or is there another place we should start looking first?
100%. I mean, that's one of the boxes you got to check before I even try to open up the door and say, hey, let's go look at a product, So a lot of these products that you do feed or these nutritional interventions, they'll be fed during the close-up phase. But if you've got a bad close-up ration or a bad transition going on, forget it. You're not going to detect any value out of the product. And my job fundamentally and ultimately is to show value on the dairy. I mean, it's going to come in a lot of different ways, but those guys are spending real money. And that value has to be evident through some KPI or indicator, key performance indicator. So if I've got a bad nutrition program in the transition, if I don't have a good close-up cow diet, if I've got a lot of milk fevers, if I have a lot of ketosis, or I'm getting fat cows from poor reproductive performance to prior lactation, all this negatively is going to affect how that cow transitions into the current lactation. Obviously, that'll have a negative effect on whatever thing you're trying to look at if you have some intervention you're trying to install. I think one of the big things on dairies that probably doesn't get enough attention is lag. So when we look at some of these things, especially in the world of reproduction, as you're trying to make a nutritional intervention, lag is a big deal. And so I can do something today and I have no expectation whatsoever that in 30 days I'm going to know anything about repro. Not going to happen. The short-term stuff, as you're talking about, milk fevers or some sort of transition issue, I can check those boxes pretty quick. Those kind of things, those I can fix pretty quick. But the repro thing, most herds are going to run, if they've got a pretty decent repro program, 100 days open or so, 90 to 120 in that ballpark. So if I do an intervention today, I'm camped out for 90 to 100 days before my first cow really overcomes the population of numbers that are the average for the dairy. That's kind of where I get into. You got to do something enough and long enough so that you begin to populate a new set of numbers that you can detect a change in over the current norms or status. And that's difficult. Some dairies have a high level of variation that you just aren't going to get around. Others are more sensitive. And so you work with that.
Yeah. So I'm going to take that question and reverse it. Is it possible for a herd to have a 40% preg rate and have transition cow problems?
Yeah.
If a herd has a 40% preg rate, do they have their transition period dialed in?
Most likely. There's a lot going right on a dairy that's running that high. Again, I'm going to go back. I'm kind of a nitpicker here. As long as you check other boxes, 40% is a great number as long as they're not cherry picking, because dairies have magnitude. I mean, the size of a dairy, whether it's 1,000 cows or 10,000 cows, can get 40%, but they need different numbers of pregnancies per week. So you got to check off the box that says, hey, I'm cherry picking. And there's just a whole vast thing to do to check off the boxes. I don't necessarily think that, oh, by golly, this dairy's got good repro rates, so it must therefore mean it has very good transition. May not. You may wreck half your transition cows, and the ones that survive it get pregnant quick. Well, that'd be a good rate,
yeah.
But the magnitude's terrible.
Right, yeah. So maybe look at mortality and morbidity before the voluntary waiting period's over in that case.
And the number of pregnancies needed. However you get there, you got to get the total right. Yeah. But most of the time, I would agree with you for sure. They're going to go hand in hand. If you have bad transition, you probably have bad repro and take off milks and peaks and several other things that collinear with that. So
I think a transition period, low-hanging fruit on a lot of dairies. When specific to these nutrition repro interactions, what do you think is the next low-hanging fruit that a lot of dairies have that might be a bottleneck nutritionally for their reproduction?
Yeah, so it's always tough. We try to, again, check our boxes, make sure that our diets are balanced right, make sure intakes are right, make sure head counts are right. But we run into bad moves a lot, to be frank about it. So we get a lot of cows that get double moved right there in that last 21-day period. And that's kind of the, not the kiss of death, but it sure creates a lot of noise for those cows. And so it's a cycle. It's the same cow. I think, again, we get into silos and we want to act like this cow that's in the close-up pen somehow is not the same cow that had 180 days open the last lactation. No, that's just not true. You got to kind of know how these lags and cycles are working. So, I think the low hanging fruit is just in my world, don't crowd, don't double move. Pressure nutritious, make sure that those rations are balanced correctly. If you're doing anionic close-up diets, and you've got to be checking pHs, dry matter intake and total head counts are key. Again, there's always, some sort of product intervention out there on the market. A lot of them work, but I just am reluctant to hang my hat on those if I don't feel like these other places are working well. And I'm sure you've seen the studies too, where a lot of the transition headaches are 70 to 80% management, and the other part's nutrition. But that little nutrition part has got to be vetted correctly and make sure you're comfortable in it, and then move on to the operational stuff.
No, I spend a lot of time talking to my students and producers about that as well, right? Like there's a lot of products you can buy out there, but they're not going to work if you don't have the basics right already. And a lot of times those are cheap or even free. So,
nothing's free.
Nothing's free. Yeah, especially in today's economy.
Well, and that's exactly right. That's a great comment. The economy is a big deal. I mean, a lot of this stuff works on cows that have some sort of comorbidity or co-issue, and a lot of cows are going to transition just fine. So it becomes cost prohibitive to have these blanket interventions outside the ration. That's what's, for me, every cow eats the diet. That's got to be right, number one. And then whatever individual interventions, the blanket stuff that covers every cow sometimes is I think a lot of money spent. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. What do you think is going to be the next big thing in reproduction nutrition interactions?
Figuring out how many carbon credits you get for a baby calf.
Oh yeah,
or an embryo.
That's harder math than I can do.
Yeah, it's probably going to get sorted out eventually. But I don't know. That's a hot topic. Don't know how quick or soon it's going to be. But it certainly is a retention of carbon in the animal, not directly related to enteric methane emission, but it's definitely a retention of carbon in the animal. And I think that's an interesting place to pay attention to as that area becomes more developed and monetized. But yeah, no, I think the next big things are, I don't know if there's ever any one big thing, it's always 1,000 little things, but I think we'll get better at nutrition as things go on. Modeling gets better, those sorts of things. Genomics, big deal. I think that's going to be a thing. I think the world of epigenetics is fascinating to me because a lot of the signals that we feed seasonally to send to the cow result in some sort of epigenetic response, at the tissue level. And so I think that's interesting. Understanding the connection between whatever that nutrient or chemical signal is that we put in through the mouth winds up manifesting, or working through some mechanism that's epigenetic, and next thing you know, you get better blood flow to the placenta, or you get whatever. So anyway, I think those are getting better. The on-farm tools to try to measure these things and connect it to a product, cow side monitoring, onboard technologies like that. I think biomarkers, companies seem to be getting more focused on trying to find a biomarker that relates to their product, and that's a big deal for us. I mean, everything. Oh well, how do you get more milk? Oh, okay, well that's everything. That's the last thing to happen on the dairy. You get more milk. Well, what happened before then? And oftentimes I have a hard time scratching my head over it, whether it's a beta carotene or a choline or an amino acid or whatever. I mean, all these things kind of have the same big indicator, right? More fat, more protein, more milk. Well, I got to get better at a biomarker to kind of know, is that really why I got that? So anyway, those technologies, companies are doing a great job, I think, of trying to get better insight and information on that we can look at on the dairy. So.
Yeah, we've come so far, but there's still so much we don't know.
Oh, there really is. I saw a fascinating machine here the other day that looks at muscle NDH or NDAH production. I'm way in over my head. It was a real quick intro to it, but this thing's estimating maintenance requirements based on a muscle tissue sample. I know. I'm like, oh, that's okay. I'm not sure what I do with that, but it's anyway, that's off topic, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want our listeners to know before we wrap up? Anything that we missed today?
No, I don't think so. There's always more to talk about and more topics, but this is a great one. The interaction here in this nutrition repro space is is a target-rich area. I think a lot of gains can happen there.
If people want to learn more about you and what you're working on, where should they go?
Well, we have a website, nutrition.com. You Google that, you'll hit us there. We have our LinkedIn page. I work with Maddie Glines. She's a nutritionist with us as well. She has a LinkedIn page, and so probably a great place to start there. You can get our email information that way as well, or I can give an email here. It's whatever you think. But so my email is dmanbrown@msn.com. Yeah, just get a hold of us however you can. But the website has a lot of information on it that way, and we're pretty good about calling you back.
All right, very good.
It's time for our famous three. Your partner in improving animal performance, Berg & Schmidt. They provide high-quality, economical feed ingredients for ruminants, like their well-researched coated nutrients and fat powders that can support cows with additional available energy, which improves their overall health, productive performance, and your cost efficiency.
Well, let's jump in then. We have 3 questions that we ask all of our guests, and you're aware of these, so no pop quiz. You got to study beforehand. But like right beforehand. So our first question that all of our guests get asked is, what is your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
I find myself using, Journal of Dairy Science quite a bit. NASEM, I have to refer to that quite a bit. And then a lot of the company white pages, the manufacturers, produce a lot of good information there. So, those are probably the 3 biggest sources I use to try to get a better understanding of, what it is I'm wanting to learn more about or understand how to deploy on a dairy. But, the independent bodies, of course, are JDS and NASEM.
What is your favorite non-dairy related book or resource?
Non-dairy related. As sad as this may sound, probably Beef NRC 96. But
okay.
Oh gosh, non-dairy. It's probably going to be things more in the commodity world. Just publications that are put out by different companies about commodity markets, milk markets, grain markets, these sort of things. Obviously, economics matters, and we've got to be pretty tuned in to what costs of ingredients are and how they're competing into rations and understanding our opportunity prices. So I look at a lot of the information that comes out over the DTN or the CME or just direct mailers to me from commodity brokers or companies that are providing that info.
All right. And our last question is, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are not successful?
Oh, love your clients for one. I mean, make their interest your interest, and that's a big deal. I mean, they really got to trust. You really got to understand that I'm on their side of the table. That we're there primarily for their success. That's the goal. If they're not successful, we're not successful, and describing that in different ways, different times over the course of the relationship with a client is huge. I mean, our retention of clients is usually pretty big. We try and just really understand how they want to run their economic function off of their milk curve. It's the same milk curve, but everybody has a different way of doing it. So I think that's a big deal. Understanding your client, your dairy as a unique individual entity, and they're going to make their production and profits in different ways, and learning what they want to do is key.
Yeah, we think we're in the cow business, but really we're in the people business.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
All right. And with that, we will go ahead and let you go. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I learned a lot. I've got some more stuff I've got to read up on now. So appreciate you stopping by.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and have a great day.
Will do.